Gillian, one of the best-known British experts in modern classical music. The Dutch technical term would be moderne symfonische muziek. Both at the Southbank Center, so something like the Westergasfabriek, maar dan 10 times as big and 6 times as impressive. Royal Festival Hall, Royal College of Music professor. 25 years of programming experience in contemporary classical music. And she has one or two very interesting experiences in finding out, and connecting to new audiences. Gillian, it's my pleasure. Please.
Okay, thank you. So I was just saying thank you for inviting me to beautiful Amsterdam on a beautiful day. I'm going to start with some music. That, for me, is one of the greatest moments in late 20th century music. It was probably actually written a few meters from where we're standing now, in Keizersgracht, because it's Louis Andriessen's piece, De Staat. And the text is in ancient Greek. And just in case your ancient Greek oral comprehension is a bit rusty, it's the bit where Plato says, it's in Plato's Republic, that the ways of music and poetry are not changed anywhere without change in the most important laws of the city. So for Plato, art was inseparable from life. The concept of ars gratia artis, art for art's sake, would have been incomprehensible. Music was useful. It had a set of very clear functions related to the enlightenment of individuals and the good of the state. And he gets very specific about the effect of particular musical constructions on human beings in the Republic and De Staat. Certain musical modes or scales were capable of inciting high moral feelings or valor in battle, or of drunkenness, idleness, and sadness, and therefore, he says, they were of no use even to women and ought to be forbidden. So while those censorious ideas may be unpalatable now, and the idea that art is so bound up with the state, now that we've lived through the Soviet Union and the Third Reich behind us, perhaps as a musician, I can have a tiny bit of envy of this idea of the centrality of music. I'm a musician, but I've made a career in music not as a performer or as a creator, a creative musician, but as an educator, an animator, and a programmer. It's always good to have impossible goals, and my own impossible goal has been to connect people immediately, to try to connect people intimately to music, to create a situation where music matters as much as Plato said it did. But I've always worked from within musical institutions, orchestras, concert halls. And the question remains for me, are our musical institutions up to the challenge of keeping music at the centre of 21st century life where it's really needed, I still believe. As symphonic music has evolved into its highly sophisticated form, it's become ever more abstracted. We listen to minuets and waltzes and polkas without dancing. We sit still in the concert hall. We hear masses and passions without priests and incense. We hear folk songs woven into symphonies and we can't sing along, much to my frustration sometimes. And look at orchestras. They were largely set up somewhere around the middle of the 19th century, and the ritual around them remains essentially unchanged. You go to a symphony concert in 2009, they will still play mainly 19th century music. They play on instruments whose technology has not changed since the 19th century. Think how fast it was developing up until that point, and then it stopped dead somewhere around the saxophone. The format of the concert has not changed at all since then either, and nor has the stage design or the costumes. In the 19th century, when public concerts were invented, orchestra and audience were wearing the same thing. They were wearing 19th century evening dress. The audience changed their dress with the times, but the orchestra has remained in costume. They still wear 19th century evening dress. I love orchestral concerts, I really do, but they're about as high a ritual theatre as kabuki, and if you don't know the rules, they can be just as alien. But much more profoundly, those are superficial things perhaps, but going on a deeper level, in parallel with the placing of the orchestra into a kind of time capsule, and for the orchestra you can read the string quartet or the solo pianist or the chamber group, there is now a different relationship, a profoundly different relationship a social relationship between the audience and the music being performed. If you went to hear a new Brahms symphony in the 19th century, and all concerts were new music in the 19th century, the chances are you'd got hold of the published sheet music beforehand in the form of a domestic arrangement, such as usually a piano duet. I mentioned Brahms because he was actually a pioneer in the new technology of music publishing and saw it as a very important information technology for getting music widely disseminated. You would have played that music in a domestic arrangement. You would have a real and practical and profound connection with what was being performed. So how to create this real and practical and profound connection in the 21st century? I want to go back in my own professional history a few decades to when I first started working in the 1980s. When my first job was to develop what was then called an educational programme for the London Sinfonietta, which is the UK's leading contemporary classical music ensemble. And this was the first programme of its kind in the UK. The London Sinfonietta was performing music which lots of people find scary, modern music. And quickly it seemed that the only way to do this educational programme, was through involving people practically in the actual stuff of the music, just like in Brahms's day. This practical approach became the model for British orchestras, all of whom now have highly developed participation programmes, which are focused on composition. And being the London Sinfonietta, we jumped in at the deep end. We started working with the music of Edgar Varèse, working in inner city schools with teenagers. And Edgar Varèse, as many of you know, was the sonic pioneer who was dreaming of electronic music 50 years, electronic music and indeed multimedia performance 50 years before it was technically possible in the 1920s to the 1950s. The principle of the work that we were doing then was to give children initially the raw materials of the music and encourage them to compose and perform their own music using those raw materials. They were usually untrained children, but just as everybody writes, when they go to school, can draw a picture or write a poem, everybody can create their own music, compose their own music. So with Varèse, for example, we played with the melodies around a single note, a very, very simple thing. We looked at what kind of harmony do you get if you bang a heating pipe or a piece of machinery? What notes can you hear in there? That's exactly what Varèse was doing. We look at the scientific analysis of the sound itself. And when the children finally heard some of Varèse's own music, one of them made a very profound comment. I'll never forget this. She said, even the trumpet sounded like a sound, which perfectly sums up Varèse's entire philosophy in one short sentence. But we were working also mainly with living composers.